2024 is fast approaching, and you know what that means? Well, aside from the odd cake and roast dinner and pudding being stuffed in our mouths, it also means time for reflection. It's time now to look back on 2023 and realise what went well and what didn't go well. I would classify this year overall as a good year. Oh sure, bad things happened, certainly, whether personally or out in the world. Bad things always do happen, but it's how we meet those bad things that matters. Overall, I classify this, for me at least, as the year of the new. New directions, new perspectives, new things. But now let's look at the old. As today, we look at the top 5 videos of 2023. Kicking it off with number 5 with a video that's, well, as a video goes, it's not that great. It's more middle of the road. But on a personal level, it did lead to my changing of habits in some ways. So for that, it does crack the top 5, as not many videos can do that. As we kick things off with becoming Batman for a week. Anyone who partakes in fitness knows very well that just as important as maintaining our fitness level, it is also important to challenge ourselves, to push further, to cross new boundaries, and to see what else is possible for us to accomplish. We here on this channel are no strangers to challenges, but this week I wanted to take things a little bit further, and not just do it for a day, because anyone could do something for a day. What can we do in a week? But just who to emulate for this challenge? Perhaps someone like Rocky Balboa or Spider-Man? Wait a minute. Aquaman! The Dark Knight has existed for nearly 80 years now, but consistent throughout all the various versions of the Caped Crusader that have existed is his persistence. After one very, very bad night, Bruce Wayne dedicated himself over his entire lifetime to eradicate all crime in his home city. And to do that, he pushed himself as far as he could, both physically and mentally, travelling the world, learning from various different experts in martial arts, in science, in criminology. And that is inspiring for everyone, to show what can be achieved if you just put your mind to it. The persistence of the human will, the dominance of the human spirit. If I can even get close to emulating that, even at 10% in just 1 week, that will be quite something to consider. Step 1. Hey mum, you got a minute? Although considering how for this week I am pretty much telling you I'm going to be Batman for the week, I've kind of already blown my secret identity, so it's safe to say that when I first said I would be doing this challenge to people, they thought I was going a bit batty.
You're mad.
Thank goodness for that, because if I wasn't, this would probably never work.
Day 1 began with a 5 AM jog. I didn't know what to expect on this first day. It had been quite some time since I had been jogging for one thing, so I didn't know how I would do on that front. So this would very much set the standard for how the week would go. For how it went really well. I didn't even trip over or anything, so I consider that already a win. But once I got home, it came to breakfast. Now during breakfast I would normally just be scrolling through social media, but not this week. This week I decided to dedicate myself to trying to further my mind as well as my body. Next came my workout, and pretty simply I just decided to take my evening workout, which I normally do, and just move that to the morning as well. So do it twice in one day.
Because it means most people draw the conclusion from being victimized that victimizing is a bad idea. So thank God for that, and I think that's one of the pieces of evidence that people are essentially good, even though they're strongly tempted to evil. So now you went out, you talked to all these educated people.
As I then moved into my martial arts training, I found that my energy levels were actually pretty good. I was not expecting to be so fine. But of course we all know, not just does Batman dedicate himself as Batman, he also is Bruce Wayne, a billionaire playboy philanthropist. and I am neither a billionaire, a playboy, or a philanthropist. So how close could I get to that? So I just decided to further myself with my business on martial arts teaching, while doing it in a more business-like manner. Now, quite paradoxically, from in terms of aftershave, I was formerly using this one, didn't focus, this one, which of course has the bat symbol on it. It was just a generic one that came out of a toiletry pack I got one Christmas. But after using that one up, I've now moved on to Armani Code, which I think will be more in line with what Bruce Wayne or someone of that caliber would use. So, bearing in mind I only have really just one suit, so I'm just going to have to wear that suit into the ground. Well, I've just come back from making a trip to the bank, so really was a good thing I'm dressed like this then. I've got some other work to do, because I have, of course, I have the second channel, which I just have done nothing with. I haven't used it for months, even though it's just sitting right there, so my focus this week, aside from doing research for one video, is to build up that second channel a bit more. I will confess, wearing a suit out to go and do things, it gave me a sort of sense of imposter syndrome. But wearing a suit felt wrong in my eyes. Because normally I would just wear something like this, just a regular t-shirt and jeans. Maybe this adds as well to the duality of the character of the Batman and Bruce Wayne sides. How sometimes there is that idea that Batman is the true face and Bruce Wayne is in fact the mask. I could see that being more of a reality as I went through my day wearing this suit, because it didn't feel like me. It felt like just something I was wearing. But as the day winded down, I felt myself being very optimistic about how the week would go, as the first day had been so great. I thought, tomorrow will be just as good as the first day. Boy, was I wrong.
And we are back. Welcome to Tuesday.
Day 2 saw all the aches and pains that I thought would come on day 1. It was much slower during the jog, my legs were feeling a lot more painful, and it even became more difficult to just stay awake during breakfast. Which just adds to the dedication that a character such as Batman puts into what he does, because he doesn't just do this thing for a week, he would do this for all his life, or most of his adult life. So, I have already filmed the second channel video for today, so I'm going to start editing it now. Day 3, things were beginning to level out again. What I think I was starting to see was that I was going to be going on the downward trend, peter a bit, and then start to move upwards again. If so, then Wednesday was definitely the petering day. Let's carry on. I've got all the research to do now for next video. I've done half the research, so I've got just another little bit I need to do, and then that's pretty much it done. Research is all done, so now I'm just getting on to doing some other bits of work before I need to go to a meeting. I'm just looking at the analytics, the second channel, so I'm just having a look now. First video on Monday did quite well. 102 views, 3 comments, 2 likes. Very good. One yesterday didn't do too well, but I'm thinking that was because I posted it earlier in the afternoon, whereas the first one I posted later. So that might be playing a role. So I'm going to try posting today's one a bit later. But I still thought to myself, well, if this is how it feels to do just all this is all the prep you have to mind in. How does it feel also, as Batman, to also do things like fighting? like fighting the criminals of Gotham City. Adding that on top and doing the nightly patrols and such. Doing that as well. How does he do it all? I think something as well is just the idea of optimization. Because you have to, probably optimize everything you do, every minute of every day, in order to just function. It felt quite isolating, in a way. But I was determined that on Thursday, I would come back stronger than ever before.
I'm not finished yet. And you're not finished with me. You're never finished with me.
It then came to Friday, the final day. I was determined to finish this week off on a high note. Reflecting on this week, it is strange to think of just that I did all of this, and yet the benchmark is infinitely higher. In some ways that kind of makes sense, because Batman is fictional, and so fictional characters can just do seemingly impossible things just so easily. But I thought to myself, if I could do this for a week, and find it difficult but still accomplish, think of how much better things could be if I could do all of this, plus the extra incentive, of even just doing sparring, which I didn't get to do this week, and add that on top, how much better things could get. It puts it into perspective even further. In the description below, I'll put in the schedule of what I did on each day, so that perhaps you can try this schedule yourself for a week, or perhaps even a month if you want to extend it further than I did. And since we always want to improve ourselves, perhaps I'll do a part 2 where I actually incorporate some sparring in as well. But that'll have to do it for this week, everyone. Until next time, thank you all for watching, and peace be with you. Now it's time for number 4. You know, I had a tough time picking which of these videos I wanted to put here, as they've all been integral, not just in terms of the channel, but also in terms of growth of skills, shall we say, as well as growth of perspective. But the video which changed that perspective the most was certainly this one, as we get to Enter the Dragon. Normally I would save something like this to the end of the video, but Enter the Dragon or Mortal Kombat, who did it better? Following the completion of Way of the Dragon, Bruce wanted to take some time out to recharge and relax a bit before moving on to any new projects. This never happened, of course, but imagine if he had. Bruce began work on his next directorial bout with Game of Death, a film we'll talk more on when we get to it. As while this was going on, Warner Bros. Executive Fred Weintraub had been following Bruce's rising stardom, showcasing tapings of The Big Boss and Fist of Fury to his colleagues in the hope of signing Lee to a film. Weintraub went to the then head of Asian distribution, Richard Ma, who, after realizing how popular the kung fu film market was becoming, began to try and convince others on it. They were eventually able to convince President Ted Ashley to give the project a chance, and with a budget allocated of $500,000, hired Michael Malin to write and eventually hired Robert Klaus to direct. All that was left was to secure Lee to the project, and although Raymond Chow was initially hesitant, all were eventually on board with the 1973 released Blood and Steel, or as it later became known, Enter the Dragon. Before we really dive into the meat and potatoes, let's take a look at the plot. Bruce Lee returns as the Shaolin Temple's best warrior, no surprises there, who is invited to a worldwide martial arts tournament held by a former elder of the temple. Lee is spurred to go by an agent of British intelligence who asks him to go and gather evidence of drug smuggling and human trafficking. Lee attends the tournament along with 2 American veterans, with John Saxon playing the gambling problem having Roper and the cool under pressure Williams played by Jim Kelly. Once it is made clear what is really going on the island, Lee must fight to stay alive with an army of fighters and the one and only Bolo on his tail. And here we've got Bruce Lee vs Bolo. Now that is a fight worth watching. Fuck. Well, not to worry, we've still got Bruce Lee vs Jackie Chan before he was Jackie Chan. This was what Bruce Lee had been building towards, his first big break into the American market, something he had been wanting since his rejection from starring in Kung Fu. Despite his success in Hong Kong, Americans only knew of him as Kato. American filmmaking was and still is a completely different ballgame to Hong Kong, where he had so far found success, and this was something he was concerned about, whereas in previous films Lee had been more of the everyman, an insanely talented everyman, but still dealing with problems that were on street level, or at least were more relatable to the average Asian viewer, unlike in this film where he had to take on a more Bond-like persona, with secluded islands, calculating villains, acid baths, and death traps.
This is starting to sound like a bad comic book plot.
He had accounted for this by writing humor more appealing to Asian viewers in Way of the Dragon, and after the raw emotion of Fist of Fury, he was a cultural hero, and did not want to risk alienating his fellow countrymen, with tensions only rising during production. There are stories of writer Michael Allen making flippant remarks towards Lee and the quality of the film, most likely stinging a perfectionist such as Bruce, as well as intentionally making the script more difficult for the multilingual Lee, with accounts from Bob Wall stating that Klaus requested for the character of Braithwaite to have his name changed to make the pronunciation more difficult. Bruce requested for the script to be changed and for Klaus to not be in his way during the directing of the action scenes, going to the point of going off set and not returning until Klaus left. Couple this with a mixed production crew of American and Asian, which created translation difficulties, increasing egos of Raymond Chow, who wanted to be seen as the mastermind behind Bruce Lee, and John Saxon, who thought himself the real star of the show, and continued hounding from Hong Kong press, as well as the continual challenging of would-be combatants wanting a piece of the so-called dragon. No wonder then that stress was so high for everyone involved, especially Lee himself. This was his big break into the American market, the one which would make or break his career going forward. After making 3 successful films in 2 years, a 4th one interrupted to make a 5th, and dealing with the pitfalls of rising fame, the psychological stress was enough for anyone to bear, let alone someone like Bruce Lee, unable to sleep, staying awake for long nights to work out choreography and draw diagrams, and often physically pushed to the limits in training and coordinating fight scenes in which he had to perform multiple grueling techniques while still acting for multiple takes at a time, in humid conditions. Lee quickly became dehydrated and lost copious amounts of weight, on top of the weight he had already lost working on Way of the Dragon. You only need to look at stills of the big boss compared to Enter the Dragon to see the toll the film took on him, with an up to 2-year difference between photos. A stress which only mounted as superstition entered the fray. Asian sectors of the film crew became paranoid and worried about the fate of Bruce after he was twice injured on set. First in the fight scene with Bob Wall on a smashed glass bottle cutting his hand after several takes where things had gone smoothly, and then again when Lee was bitten by the rattled cobra that was thankfully drained of venom. Again after multiple takes where things had progressed perfectly. If this is not a metaphor for going too far after already doing enough, I don't know what is. Paranoia was in the air towards someone who they saw as not just their champion, but one of their own, who routinely worked himself to the bone, earning the respect of his fellow stuntmen and they him. But just how does all of this work into the film? Let's take a closer look at this film's fight scenes to find out. This scene takes place in the underbelly of the island. While this would typically be metaphorical journeying to hell, forms of sin instead infect every facet of this compound, from lust to pride. So this is a deeper layer of hell? Whatever it is, after Lee sends a telegram to British intelligence to send reinforcements, the guards come to arrest him. One tries to grab him, but he traps the guard's arm in a circular block before delivering a body shot to the side, quickly throwing a second over himself, and delivering a roundhouse to a third who was conspicuously in his gi. Evening training? Before long, he blocks a flying kick before delivering presumably a sweep, but we cannot tell due to the angle. A combination of outside kicks before blocking and striking in a quick succession. A lot of these techniques come courtesy of Northern Shaolin, a style of kung fu which Lee himself was not really a practitioner of, and it wasn't really in his regular wheelhouse or what he really taught, but it was deemed more theatrically appropriate. The earlier fight with Bob Wall was probably closer to his actual style. But anyway, a combination of kicks leads to a movement blocked by the stuntman, but based on the angle and reaction might have been to the neck, another leg block, body blow, and a quick throw as a wild Jackie Chan appears. This was that point in his career where he was breaking into the industry but needed some extra work. And who can say no to being hit in the face by Bruce Lee? Another flurry of strikes to whet our appetite, at first putting his Wing Chun training to work before again becoming more theatrical. Lee takes a star from a guard in a roundhouse combo, putting it to great use before switching to the Eskrima sticks. He then moves to the old familiar nunchucks. This element of the fight scene, whether decided by Lee himself or by Alan, showcases an evolution to Bruce Lee's abilities. So far, he has gone from one nunchuck to 2 to multiple weapons. Although, maybe this was also done because the UK had a nunchuck embargo at the time, but at least this way some of the fight will be shown. Maybe that's also why he only uses them on 3 guards. In any event, he is cornered in the cliched death trap and is forced to wait to be executed.
Oh no! Anyway.
The film concludes with Lee facing down Han. The climax and location of the Hall of Mirrors is instantly iconic. I wonder if this was a request from Bruce Lee himself during the rewrites, as it plays into those more philosophical notions of dispelling reality from illusion. But even so, it feels more like Han is a character ripped from those classic Bond films, especially when compared even to Chuck Norris last time. This is less the back and forth rhythmic dance of Bruce Lee, and more like a spy thriller. So you can see more where the two ideas really conflict and why Lee himself was so hesitant about it all. Even so, the film ends with the facilities being overrun by prisoners, who are played by extras that included members of the Chinese triad, who used the chaos of this climax to settle old scores. Lovely.
as we were also robbed of seeing Bruce Lee fight Bolo. But then I suppose with him having just fought Chuck Norris and about to fight Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, it wouldn't have meant much to see Bruce fight another big guy.
And even so, the variety did not slow down this film, as it became an instant classic. Suddenly, the martial arms race was on, and everyone wanted to have their own piece of the proverbial pie. All of them wanting to have the next big martial arts film in the West. And despite all the stress and it wearing him down pretty hard, this film still skyrocketed Bruce Lee's career to unimaginable heights, jettisoning him into a much wider audience. But unfortunately, Bruce Lee would not live to see any of this. We'll go into more detail about this next time, but until then, thank you all for watching, and until next time, peace be with you. Number 3, with the most recent on the list, and this one was certainly again perspective shifting, and it couldn't help but solidify my understanding that despite all martial arts all around the world, no matter where they come from and what they display, we're all united on the same path, as we take a look at the history behind Japanese martial arts. Ha! You think you can defeat me with your puny katana? My sword's steel was folded 10,000 times. It can cut through diamonds. Oh really? Well, I have nunchucks. Dude, those are ours. What? No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. Bruce Lee used them. They're ours. Oh yeah? Well, which martial arts are they from? Karate? Oh. Well, we still have Bruce Lee. Ah, but we have Mr. Miyagi and anime. Sun Wukong, and we were here first. You may have started it, but we perfected what you did. Set by someone who still can't do groundwork. Neither can you! Alright. Alright. When it comes to martial arts, the debate rages.
Chinese martial arts were here first, but Japan perfected what they did. China had the warrior monks, while Japan had the samurai. And then Korea tries to interject and be part of the conversation.
Nobody likes you.
And it is always important to be objective, so today I will step over this metaphorical Mason-Dixon line as a respective Chinese martial arts enjoyer and take a look at what Japanese martial arts has to offer to see if there's any middle ground here. Now, as we're looking at Japanese martial arts, we first of all need to look at the history. And most of Japan's history is taken up by warfare, as well as the innovations that spring forth from it.
This is what led to the China-born strategies morphing into the more notable samurai, as well as an evolution to the philosophy surrounding martial arts. Much of this knowledge would be kept to specific clans, kept hidden or secret. But even so, the necessities at the time brought about some commonalities. The reliance on horseback due to the terrain of the region also led to more need for horsebound archery.
Message for you, son.
Strategies tailored to getting people off of horses. And in terms of close combat, wrestling. Grappling was a crucial component to samurai training, over time splitting into the two distinct camps of combat wrestling and sumo, which was more entertainment based and had been around for far longer. There was also a form of grappling which included a short sword in hand, most likely used for the common hobby of beheading opponents, as tallying the number of heads accrued.
Well, when they tell you to get ahead in life, I'll see myself out.
These grappling techniques later evolved, and out of which grew Jiu-Jitsu. The actual formation of Jiu-Jitsu is more in the realms of legends than fact, according to which it all began with a Chinese martial arts master named Chen Yuanbin, who had once been in Hanzhou, but moved to Japan in his later years, as many would, apparently being highly respected by the Tokugawa clan. Chen, according to legend, had a dialogue with 3 masterless samurai, or ronin, which then snowballed into Jiu-Jitsu, or the Chinese method of seizing a man. Evidence around this is sketchy, but it is safe to say that what happened was that Chinese techniques were mixed with Japanese grappling techniques to create Jiu-Jitsu.
But things began to change as warfare ended, as the Tokugawa shogunate took hold of Japan's rule in 1603.
With this came an era in which the samurai no longer had any wars to fight, forcing the continually evolving crafts of the samurai to quickly solidify and become ritualized and formalized into sports. Forms of martial arts were lost as new rituals took over. The warrior class of the samurai retained their status, but had gone from sword fighting and beheading to tea drinking and playing board games as the bureaucracy of running a country took hold. But nothing lasts forever, as the Meiji Restoration took shape in 1868. With this restoration came a sudden jump in progression as modern ideas took hold. With more communication with the West, the old ways of the samurai were characterized as kabudo or karayu.
Within a decade, the samurai were gone, as the class was liquidated. Jiu-jitsu, however, took hold quickly as a martial art. But martial arts are nothing if not continually adapting.
Kano Jigoro was a slight individual, standing at 5'2" and weighing 90 pounds. He began learning jiu-jitsu as the modernization began. At the time, jiu-jitsu was not at the level of having dedicated spaces or recognized regulation. Instead, it was taught behind closed doors from former samurai or samurai-adjacent individuals. Kano found himself unsatisfied with the education of these first masters, finding holes in the techniques and not really agreeing with the teaching method of the time, which was get thrown around until you learn.
Sounds like secondary school football.
With this dissatisfaction, he broadened his horizons by going to the library, finding examples of Western wrestling methods. Kano spent years subsidizing his jiu-jitsu training with outside sources, and eventually became the inheritor to knowledge after his first two masters passed away, bequeathing him manuals and scrolls on the art form in 1881. Kano went to a third master in Kitu-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, receiving additional scrolls from this master in 1883. Let's just take a moment to realize how brilliant that is. He didn't accept the holes in the system he had inherited, and so he went outside of his regular wheelhouse of knowledge and found a new way. It's brilliant!
All of this led to Kano no longer practicing the jiu-jitsu of his formers. He combined together everything he had learned to create a new martial art, the Pliant Way, also known as Judo. Now, Kano did not spend all his time doing martial arts. He also ran a black market weapons dealership. Oh, and he was also in the teaching sector.
Having a hand at the Tokyo Teacher Training College, he saw the poor attitudes the boys attending school had around rules and respect, especially towards their teachers, who were weak-willed and subservient to these snot-nosed brats.
Fortunately, he was in a position to do something about it.
By judo throwing the brats and making them play Sega Saturn.
Or
By installing martial teachings into the teaching curriculum, with it, along with the values it taught, eventually becoming part of the school curriculum. Eventually, Kano installed a grading system into judo, having his students graduate into black belts, and to give judo the respect it deserved, he made his students wear a specific uniform. By 1909, including the kaigogi, or dogi, as judo was a part of the school curriculum, this change was noticed quickly, and soon other martial arts joined the trend in its wake.
the gi also had the benefit of creating a communal spirit for students, as well as making all these students of different classes equal in lessons.
Kano's presence in the education sector meant that many foreign eyes got to see judo in action, and even give it a go themselves, including Lafcadio Hearn, who called judo an example of how quickly judo had adapted the Western ideals and its technological feats in only a generation. It was unfortunately also used to propel some mild racism by stating that although judo was awesome, it still could not compare to the West, where it had been inspired.
And this was all before World War II. And judo has gone from strength to strength since then, becoming an Olympic sport and becoming recognised as a kabudo art. Much like another martial art. We travel now to the Ryukyu Islands.
The islands were used as a trading route for Chinese ships since around 1372, being in more of a liminal spot between China and Japan. This was a natural point of crossover, especially as it held descendants of those who had migrated from China in the 14th century. The fabled bringing of the 36 families of China was said to bring many things to the islands, including martial arts, such as White Crane style. The history of the Ryukyu Islands held many states of discourse, including the weapons ban, brought by King Shoshin in 1507, with it being said that many of the peasant class began learning self-defense underground, using household appliances, which is what led to the use of weapons such as the sai or nunchucks.
No, I did not steal these from any turtles. Why do you ask?
Another weapons ban came in 1609 by the Satsuma clan of Japan, leading to the again underground development of an empty-handed style of fighting based on Chinese styles, with the sole purpose of this being to survive. The more stylistic elements of the martial art were put aside in favour of pure effectiveness. In a coincided fashion, the Jiu-Jitsu, which developed after the ritualization of wartime practices.
They also allied with the Tangerine clan, but that's another topic.
The China Hand System, or Totei, or Karate, began to surface to the world in the 19th century. Karate was adopted into the Ryukyu Island education system at around 1901, and like Judo, was considered a refinement of older styles. Where Judo and Kendo were being mandated in Japanese schools, Itoso Anko petitioned for Karate to be considered as well, doing this despite Karate at the time not having any standard or uniform style, with each school having their own. Only recently had Miyagi Shogun.
Hold on a moment. Oh, that's brilliant!
Defined his style as Goju Ryu, or the hard soft style.
He nearly called it the wax on, wax off style, but the connotations were a bit dicey.
It was Funakoshi Gichin who finally brought the martial art to mainland Japan proper. He and his Shotokan school demonstrated their style in Kyoto in 1915, published a book in 1922, and officially moved his school to Tokyo that same year. In 1936, he popularized the name moving from karate to karate, or empty hand, making it more palatable to the nationalist Japanese government, although this did cause controversy with contemporaries. He also moved for standardization and rankings for karate schools, a move which again caused problems for many schools, which had so far relied on wealth and generational birthing for their reputation.
But it all really worked out as karate became known as one of the most renowned Japanese martial arts worldwide. Doesn't mean it's the best though. Oh, come on. You're still telling me that after all of that, you're still going to sit on that high horse? Look, sure, your styles have done a lot, but we've got more history. History does not make it good. No, but it does leave an impact.
Japanese styles have flourished in the relatively short time that they have been around, but the whole reason why they have flourished is due to the circumstances they began in, ritualizing and standardization. Now don't get me wrong, you sometimes need that linear path to measure against and give clear boundaries, especially when establishing that foundation. Yet at the same time, there is a merit to branching off into many different styles, variations in techniques, and creating this multicolored tapestry of culture.
In the end, there is no better or worse camp. There's just differences in styles. Hell, even Chinese martial arts have their root in Indian martial arts. Maybe it's better not to be constantly fighting each other. Maybe it's time we started learning from each other. Not a chance. Now give me a straight answer. Chinese is better. Pressure point. Oh. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, everyone, peace be with you. Nearly done now as we get to number 2. It was difficult to actually put which of these two I wanted to put. I think these two will always interchange in my heart, but for today, number 2, modern vs traditional martial arts.
Jeffrey mocks other martial arts. I mean, why wouldn't he? His martial art is so great. A martial art needs to be effective, and surely there was nothing to learn from all these other martial arts. So Jeffrey mocks them. Adonis. Adonis has gotten to the very top of his martial art, but he doesn't stop there. He looks to other sources, to other martial arts, and learns from them. He humbles himself before masters of other disciplines, and he takes in their wisdom. And once he has taken in all he can, he goes back to his martial art and integrates what he has learned. But he doesn't stop there. Adonis sees other people working on their martial arts journeys, and he encourages them. He's proud of their progress and encourages them to keep going.
For as long as there have been societies, there's been generational differences. Old money versus new money, what was versus what is. Martial arts is no stranger to this, with traditional martial arts versus modern martial arts. A debate that has certainly raged its fair over the years. From debates to matchups to a few jokes or two. But where does this whole debate come from? Where was the start of this whole divide, and where is it going to move forwards? Because if we cannot at least break bread with each other, could we at least remain neutral? Let's find out today. One of the first factors to consider when looking at martial arts and how it has evolved is not necessarily the martial arts itself, but at politics. We're already getting controversial. For a long time in Asian countries, martial arts were seen as exactly what they say on the tin. It was about martial warfare, which is basically just saying war for warfare. It was about being the most effective in their own unique ways. Learning to use a sword, a spear, a shield, a dagger, bow and arrow. Martial arts had its purpose, but beyond that it also had the purpose of spiritual enlightenment, most especially in places such as the Shaolin Temple, or at centers of Zen Buddhism where they went more into Tai Chi, where martial arts was used not just as a form of defense or as a form of warfare, it was used as a form of spiritual experience. But as war goes on over history, it also evolves with technology. And so at a certain point, punches and kicks kind of went out of fashion on the battlefield, and especially after World War II. Which is also where a lot of countries, such as America, were first exposed to Eastern martial arts. And this is where we see American-style dojos spread their wings. As after World War II, people still wanted that communal spirit, that wartime spirit of brotherhood and of being together. They had gone through a shared experience which, coming home, no one else had experienced. And not only that, they had these newfound skills which they found didn't really find a use in society. So what do? They open up a school and they organise these things among themselves. And because it was linked to such an event as World War II, it became very personal, the practice of martial arts. And maybe even became linked to the world before warfare, before the world wars even happened, which is where there was much more of the stringent ties to tradition. You see, in the wake of a post-World War II world, it was one thing to stick to tradition, to stick to the old world. That is certainly one route to go down. But there's the other route as well of continuing to move forward, of facing the reality that this is a new world and we have to live in it. We have to move forward. And so there came the push for, well, finding more effective ways to fight. If not for actual combat, at least for sparring. And it's become to the point where we have 3 new camps of martial practice. Where first we have traditional martial arts, the ones which place tradition over effectiveness. These are martial arts which may still involve sparring, may still involve combat activities, but they'll place the tradition and place more of the original intent of techniques over the moving forward. These will be the various branches of karate, kung fu, aikido, and then there comes modern martial arts. I'm making a distinction here because there's 2 forms of modern martial arts. I'll get into the second one later. But first of all, there's modern martial arts. Now these can be martial arts or combat sports which have traditional roots. They have history, but they keep in touch with the contemporary by continually pressure testing, by continually wiping away the old and making room for the new. You know that the people who are at the top of their game in these respective martial arts are the absolute peak. They are the most effective in what they do. So these would include things like boxing, BJJ, Muay Thai, martial arts that may have an older background but still keep up to date with the new. And then we come to the third one, postmodern martial arts. And this is basically just MMA, where instead of it being a specific system of martial arts, it is instead sort of a melting pot for varieties of martial arts. The idea is, it's just what works, works. If someone in the UFC walked into the octagon and said that they were going to win by clucking like a chicken, and they did it, you would hear the local gym become a lot more like KFC.
He's out of line, but he's right.
So we now have these 3 camps, and let's be honest here, divides between these camps is quite often quite different. Now don't get me wrong, postmodern, in MMA you'll find people that have practiced traditional martial arts, but what you'll often find is that either people will say that they have to practice something more modern in order to keep touch, in order to keep base, or they'll say that the traditional martial arts is useless and they need to move on to something else completely. The idea is always that the traditional martial arts is a hampering to their martial ability. At least that's the perspective that people are always told when they practice traditional martial arts and go into that postmodern environment. Whereas modern martial arts, they'll just say that traditional martial arts is crap and you shouldn't practice it at all and should only practice modern or postmodern. Everyone always seems to dunk on traditional.
Everybody hates me!
Don't be silly, not everyone's met you.
Taekwondo is an interesting outlier because it is characterized as a traditional martial art because it maintains tradition over pressure testing, over pushing boundaries within its martial arts. So it stays in that traditional mindset, but it stays in that traditional categorizing, but it has the mindset of a modern martial art, because you will often see Taekwondo practitioners, teachers, etc. pushing against other traditional martial arts like karate or kung fu, and then everyone just dumps on Aikido. Taekwondo is especially an interesting outlier because there are people that practice Taekwondo at an Olympic level, which is interesting. Because you would think if Taekwondo was practiced at an Olympic level, it would be more of a modern or postmodern martial art, one that did push its boundaries, but no, it's much more specialised. You don't really see Taekwondo practitioners doing boxing combinations to add to their power. They tend to keep to what they do best. I might even start to say that Taekwondo is its own category in its own right. It's just, what are you? But that's when we come to the next factor here, effectiveness. And this seems to where the big divide comes from in terms of martial arts. That always seems to be the idea, at least, that traditional martial arts, not effective at all, so they have their own, everyone dunks on them. Modern martial arts, they can be effective, but they're a bit too specialised on their own to be truly effective. Postmodern martial arts is brilliant and everyone should do it. That seems to be the perspective. But if effectiveness was the only category by which martial arts was allowed to survive and thrive, then we wouldn't have half of the martial arts that we have existing today. I mean, capoeira wouldn't be called effective by any means, and yet its beauty and its history and its culture has allowed it to survive and thrive into the modern day for good reason, the same being for Tai Chi. This is where you see debate on martial arts such as Krav Maga, because the idea is meant to be that Krav Maga was built for the military. It was built, again, for that combat purpose, but so was every martial art. I mean, join the club. The idea that the Krav Maga has any sort of special significance is laughable, especially when you consider how even today, or even when Krav Maga was invented, Krav Maga has to go up against a gun. If they mean more effective in terms of a self-defense situation, certainly any martial art can teach you any sorts of moves. I mean, there's over 180 martial arts out there, but everywhere you go, a punch is a punch. If every martial art teaches you how to throw a punch, every martial art is effective. But not every martial art can teach you that fight or flight, that immediate instinctual knowing of what to do when you get attacked by someone completely random out of the blue. No martial art can truly teach you that. So by those metrics then, how do we define effectiveness? MMA teaches effectiveness by going straight to the point, less faff and more of just the useful points from each martial art, all voltron together into their own conglomeration. But then by that same token, you lose out on the philosophy and the unspoken lessons that come with those techniques. Sand the floor doesn't really have as much of a ring to it if you don't actually sand the floor and put in the hard work to learn that technique. If you're just do that. And within that, we need to question, therefore, what we consider as effective. Because certainly we can say that there's the one camp of effectiveness being defined through competition and pressure testing, but there's the other camp of effectiveness being in terms of just how we live our lives day to day, more of the stoic approach. And in that context, then martial arts such as Tai Chi come back into the forefront. And unlike something like MMA, which takes out that philosophy and perhaps more of the spiritual edge to make way for more of a scientific bent to martial arts, Tai Chi is not really based in most effective in terms of physical combat and more about that spirituality and philosophy. That's where it just lives. And so if you define something as effective by those parameters, well then Certainly, it looks very effective, honestly. But what about those parts of martial arts which perhaps could be effective, but are just repressed? Like, for example, Qinna. This is a branch of Chinese martial arts, which largely is not practiced that much anymore, due to the bend that Chinese martial arts has taken over the years. As it's become more about performance and demonstration, things such as sparring, things such as Qinna, things which could more obviously impact the body in a negative way, have been sort of pushed to the side, not practicing much. And so Qinna, which is about pins, locks, grapples, things which are more effective, they've been pushed away and largely repressed. And so by that, it leaves the overall image of Chinese martial arts as being not very effective. And so, to anyone that doesn't know about these things and just sees the performance and the demonstration side, yeah, it doesn't look very effective.
Round one.
Which is where we really get on to another big factor in terms of the differences here. Media influence. First, looking back at modern and postmodern, you'll have things like boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, Taekwondo, which is more traditional, but for our purposes now, we'll rank it with the others. So these martial arts are defined by the Olympics, by UFC, by boxing matches, by competition, by matches, and so by that it gives it more of a bend of legitimacy. You have a clearly defined goal. You have a winner, you have a loser. You can see what works and what doesn't. You know that these people have trained themselves to their absolute limits, trained their technique to their very best. You know this because you can see it. Whereas more traditional martial arts, like karate, like kung fu, they're seen more, if not in their own competitions, where it's like point sparring, for example, or demonstrations, then you'll have them only in film and television, which has that bend of, it's choreographed, it's not real, you couldn't actually have that happen. And especially in things such as wuxia productions, which deal in magic. So then you go, oh, well, the martial arts, that can't actually happen in real life, it looks too theatrical, nah, it can't possibly be real. Even with that, you will still have martial arts that, even if they are traditional and not seen as very effective, you'll see them trend upwards once again, with media influence. I mean, just look at what happened with the Ip Man franchise. As soon as that came out in 2008, everyone wanted to learn Wing Chun. Or look at in the 80s, or now. Cobra Kai, Karate Kid, while those were out, everyone wanted to learn karate, especially in America. It's through storytelling that we are inspired in our own stories of our lives. And so if we see someone and we identify with someone who takes on these certain traits or do these certain things, and we want to be more like them, we do these certain things. So if you want to be more like Daniel LaRusso, you'll go and practice karate. You want to be more like Ip Man? Wing Chun. And so we see so far a divide that exists, not just due to reputation through media influence, but also through its goals and aims. While more traditional martial arts have the reputations based in legends, in film, in fiction, so they look more fantastical, but they still inspire people to practice them, and they have more of a influence with spirituality, and with more of the internal side, where it comes with traditionalism. More modern martial arts and postmodern martial arts, you'll see them have more of a reputation based in competition, in the Olympics, in UFC, in boxing matches, and more of a basis in science, in what is analytical, graphical, what can be tested and pressured, and made to be more effective over time. But now I want to come to this string of the debate, which I heard about a while ago. It's from this one YouTuber named Ramsey Dewey. Now, I will say off the bat, check him out. He is a very, very knowledgeable chap. Very chill videos. He really knows his stuff. Talks more in MMA terms, but still really good. So I would say check him out when you can. But the point I saw him bring up was the idea of traditional martial arts being more like a dead language, like Latin, or like linear inscription. You can study these ancient languages and get more of an understanding, more of a context of how our modern languages were developed. It's useful in that way. And can even be used to create something new, a new language, like what Tolkien did when he was writing his books. You can do that, but it's more effective today to learn a newer language like French, like Italian, like Spanish. That's his idea. And I see why he's making this point, because language is a segment of culture much like martial arts. These two are very much symptoms of the culture they stem from. While he's right in that sort of assessment, I don't think he's quite correct in this more linear idea that he's presenting. Because once a dead language is a dead language, that's it, really. We don't see people suddenly... We don't see whole countries suddenly learning Latin again. Doesn't happen. Whereas martial arts, as we've already mentioned, martial arts goes through trends. So while at the moment people are trekking more towards learning MMA or learning more modern martial arts, there is also that upward tick of people learning more traditional martial arts, such as karate, while Cobra Kai is on the air. And a few years ago it was Wing Chun. And as Ramsey says, you can take a traditional martial art, retool it to fit into the more modern parameters. So that doesn't really mean that the martial art itself, the core traditional martial art, is ineffective. It just means it needs to be updated a little bit. It just needs to be retooled in order to fit a modern slant. And so in these three camps, that is where we lie. We have the traditional martial arts, which deals more in spirituality, in the internal that comes with tradition. We have modern martial arts, which has traditional roots, but still remains effective. And then we have postmodern, which does pretty much just whatever it needs to in order to work. So as we've seen it go on, it's become more and more relying on the physical, on the scientific, which is sort of emblematic of post-Enlightenment society, really. So, but by the time we reach this point of postmodern martial arts, where does the spirituality factor back in? Where does the philosophy factor back in? Okay, people still practice spiritual practice on a personal level, but martial arts has done so much historically in terms of philosophy. I mean, think of how many philosophers go back to martial arts, to some form of combat sport as a reference point and say, if you do this at least once a week, you'll be happier. But how many martial artists have gone into philosophy throughout history? Perhaps it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater to throw the philosophy and the spirituality out of the less effective martial arts. And so while certainly postmodern martial arts are good at what they do, does that necessarily equate to them being good for everything? Because certainly someone that does MMA, someone that does more modern martial arts, they're good for what they do, but how does that help people in everyday life? How does that help people become more spiritually whole? It can on a personal level, but if people are left up the creek without a paddle in this whole system, is it really working? So I would say perhaps we need to go back more to the middle of the modern martial arts and say, hold on a minute. Perhaps we're going a bit too far too quickly. And I think even traditional martial arts needs to take a minute and say, where are we in history? Do we need to move forwards? Make no mistake, I'm someone that practices traditional martial arts as well, and I don't want the spiritual side, the traditional sides of martial arts to be lost completely if we have to move forwards, taking out the less effective techniques. I don't want to throw the tradition out as well, because that's a big part of traditional martial arts. But let's be honest here, even ones like Kung Fu are a joke. In large swaths of Chinese martial arts are just not effective, laughable when compared to even the lowest ranks of the UFC. And that is a shame, because when you consider how the spiritual sides of martial arts, MMA, the postmodern, functions a lot like ancient Chinese martial arts used to, exploring knowledge, trying to learn more, going out into the world and learning new techniques and being experimental. That was what Chinese martial arts, like the Shaolin Temple, that's what they used to do. It's it was less a system and more a lifestyle. So UFC functions a lot, or MMA functions a lot more like ancient Kung Fu used to. Funny that. So what these two need to do really is meet in the middle. We need to maintain the traditions of the past, certainly, but we need to have an eye on the future as well. Be willing to evolve and move forwards. Not allow ourselves to become succumbed to quicksand and sink. Because Kung Fu has been around since at least the 6th century AD, and I don't know about you, but I don't want it to die out anytime soon. But to do that, it needs to be willing to evolve. So, good first step for that would be include sparring once again. Rely less on demonstration and performance. So do I think that this whole divide needs to exist between modern, postmodern and traditional? Not in that order. No. Because there is still something to learn from all of these, from all of these different sectors of martial arts, there's still something to learn. But we need to be willing and humble enough to learn from each other, not to divide up and start going into the trenches. If we're willing to meet in the middle, if we're willing to break bread with each other and be willing to learn from each other, that is great, because it means that everyone can move forwards equally. But if we start just trying to lob insults at each other, or say that something is ineffective and needs to be left into the past, then that's just not going to help anyone. But what do you think? Let us know down in the comments down below. And until next time, thank you all for watching, and peace be with you. And number 1. This has been the year where I've been trying new things, and most especially new formats of videos, and it certainly has succeeded, but it started off here with this video. As we ask, what is true Kung Fu? Chinese martial arts have existed since the 6th century AD, and in that time they've been associated with many myths and legends. But an idea which has persisted all the way to the modern day is the idea of true Kung Fu. Well, today I'm here to ask, is such a thing real? And if there is such a thing as true Kung Fu, where is it and how do we find it? But before we go too far, first we need to ask the question, what is Kung Fu? After all, how are we to discuss something and we can't define it? Well, the term Kung Fu or Gung Fu didn't really exist associated with martial arts until the 70s. Before then, Chinese martial arts was simply known as that, Chinese martial arts or Chinese boxing, or as the style that you were referring to, such as 7-Star Praying Mantis, Tiger Style, etc. It wasn't until the 1970s with Bruce Lee that the term began to be associated with Chinese martial arts, with the term bitter work referring to, as you might imagine, hard work, or doing something for so long and putting such effort and skill into it that you gain a level of mastery of it. People would say that you have Kung Fu in cookery, for example, or in art, or martial arts. It fits really well with the philosophy of Chinese martial arts, and so the name just stuck. Plus, when Bruce Lee names something, you kind of have to stick with it. And so if Chinese martial arts or Kung Fu is referring to hard work, then where does the idea of true Kung Fu come from? Or this sort of mythical idea of there being a true form of Chinese martial arts? Well, first let's take a look at the influence that media has had on martial arts. First, there is wuxia, a style of filmmaking which takes a look at more mythical characters, more characters of myth and legend within Chinese culture. And so, these films often display a lot of, say, high-flying acrobatics, a lot of high kicks, a lot of gravity-defying feats. And martial arts, or Kung Fu, have been associated for a long time with wuxia. And of course, a lot of this would also bear in mind the idea of magical power, attaining magical power through that, again, hard work, and through bitter work. A prominent example, for example, is the book series of Journey to the West, in which varieties of characters attain magical power or attain martial prowess through years of hard work and dedication, such as the most famous character, Sun Wukong, who after years of training with a Taoist sage, attains many powers, including powers of transformation, levitation via riding of a cloud, being able to shrink or grow, as well as duplication magic. And with him being known for carrying one of the most famous weapons of Chinese martial arts, and most especially Shaolin with his staff, it makes more sense why the idea of magical power could be associated with Chinese martial arts. Also, let us be honest, with a variety of demonstrations or techniques showcased by Shaolin monks, it makes a lot of sense why people would think that they had magical power. If you saw someone being struck with a heavy iron pillar, or being able to jump into the air and then crash down onto the ground onto a hard concrete floor and be perfectly fine, you would think that they would have attained some level of greater magical power. Another idea which comes up a lot is the idea of pressure points. The idea of being able to strike multiple specific areas of the body to create an immediate reaction. While in reality this sort of thing is, well, fictional, it does carry with it a lot of weight in terms of the idea of mystical power. And looking at the physique of a lot of Shaolin monks, if you saw a Shaolin monk punch someone and suddenly be able to send them far out across the room or do a heavy amount of damage, you would think that some sort of magical power was involved, especially if you were particularly superstitious, or especially if you were not very well versed in the training methods of Shaolin. And over time, as these feats would spread, it would make sense why magic would come into it as a way to explain how these seemingly tiny Shaolin monks could do such things, especially as the stories of the Shaolin monks journeyed out of China and over to the West. But of course that's all the physical, but what about the spiritual? Because as we've already discussed, the feats of the characters within Journey to the West, or in Wuxia, they are often presented by characters who not only attain power through physical labour, or through physical training, but also through spiritual training, a journey towards enlightenment. That's the very point of Journey to the West after all. So we have to also underline the spiritual influence of this idea of true Kung Fu. Because when the Shaolin Temple first became about martial arts, it was a way to attain greater ability to practice their spiritual beliefs. It was a way to better meditate for longer periods of time and to be healthier for spiritual practice. In fact, in many regions where they practice form work, they will refer to it not as form work but as sutras or as prayers. It is a spiritual experience as much as it is a physical one. And so if martial skill becomes a journey towards enlightenment or a journey towards spiritual influence, then the more spiritual ideas could easily become ingratiated into the physical. But then if we consider that the Chinese culture also includes medicine in with their spiritual practice, how there'll be things such as Qigong or Tai Chi, which involve a series of breathing exercises or a series of stretching movements which are meant to affect the energy of the inner body for the process of healing, or things like acupuncture, which are again supposed to hit specific pressure points. Then you see how the spiritual influence could easily influence the physical in order to greater magnify this idea of a magical influence. All of that has certainly underlined the idea of how Kung Fu or Chinese martial arts can be associated with magic or with mystical influence. But how does that then underline the idea between Kung Fu and true Kung Fu? This idea, and what I mean by true Kung Fu is this idea of going up into the mountains, coming across an old master or an aging master, and learning mystical, secret powers from them. Where does that idea come from? Well, I think one answer is again the media. This idea of finding a master all the way up in the mountains and learning secret techniques from him. That idea has certainly been perpetrated in films, but the other idea which I think could have caused this idea of true Kung Fu is there's two schools of thought when it comes to Chinese martial arts. There's the pre-Mao school of thought and the post-Mao school of thought. And let me explain what both of those are. You see, what happened was that after World War II, when the Communist Revolution happened in China, Mao certainly liked martial arts. He liked Chinese martial arts. He liked to see it, but even though he liked it, that doesn't mean that he could let it by. Because Chinese martial arts, any martial arts really, they often have this hierarchy within the schools. This idea of the master and the student, and then above the master, you'll have the masters here, then you'll have the Grand Master, or the High Masters, or whatever you want to call them. And if there's that particular hierarchy, and you have these students which are loyal to the Grand Masters, or to the High Masters, then they're not loyal to the state. And so what do you do with that? If someone's not loyal to you, they're loyal to a master. Someone who probably has certain moral values, which probably will go against what you're doing. Well, you need to get this under control. How do you do that? By standardizing, of course. And so that began the movement towards wushu. And so those that were in China that wanted to practice Chinese martial arts began to practice them in a more standardized fashion, or a fashion which relied more so on form work, more so on performance, more so on demonstration. It still meant that people could be healthy, which is a good thing because you want healthy people to fight for your state. It also marked pride, especially in later years, pride for something that was traditional, a traditional part of the Chinese culture. And it's something that espoused good moral values. And so if you have something which does all those things, and you have it at a level of control where it won't interrupt the state's agenda, well then, what do you have to worry about? The rogue element. You see, there were masters who did not appreciate what they were doing, and so left China and went to other places. They went to Taiwan, or went to India, or went to Australia, or went to wherever. And these masters, they practiced the pre-Mao Chinese martial arts. This true Chinese martial arts. Not Kung Fu, Chinese martial arts. And that's how a lot of these styles have allowed to remain. These more effective ideas, things like Chin Na, but these are in very rare places, and the unfortunate part is that if a master, an older master, who knows all these secrets, dies before passing on that knowledge, then that of course means that the knowledge dies with them. And so you see how this sort of idea begins, this idea of true Kung Fu, because if there is something which is against an agenda of the state, it survives over here, but in remnants, in small patches, in small clusters. But it still is able to live. Maybe not for very long. Then there is a chance of finding it. And after all, Chinese martial arts have existed since the 6th century AD. And so you can imagine how much information we have both gained in that time and lost in that time. Through again this process of the knowledge not being able to be passed on or being destroyed. Because the Shaolin Temple has, in that time, been raided and destroyed several times, so it only makes sense. But do I think that such a thing as true Kung Fu does exist? Yes and no. Yes, in terms of there is a true way to practice Chinese martial arts, and no in that it's probably not in the way you're thinking. Is there going to be such a thing as mystical power? Or mystical what have you? I agree with the idea of spiritual influence in Chinese martial arts. It is quite powerful to think about how martial skill, especially whether cultivated or if you have a natural talent at it, is a gift from God. That is a powerful idea. It's a very empowering notion. And I don't know about other masters of any sort of martial art, but I intend to use my martial skill for the purposes of good, for the purposes of serving the Lord. And so in that respect, if you're practicing it with that in mind, you could be moving towards true Kung Fu. But what about the other idea, the idea of pre-Mao Kung Fu? Well, the idea of pre-Mao Kung Fu, or true Kung Fu. Well, what was the original purpose of Kung Fu? The original purpose was, again, for spiritual enlightenment, but it was also towards the furtherance of knowledge, or the sharing of knowledge. As Shaolin masters or disciples of the Shaolin Temple would go out to other temples or to other places to gain new knowledge, to spread knowledge. And so in that respect, if you yourself go out into the world humbly trying to learn more or to spread knowledge, then that is going more so towards the original concept of Kung Fu. And especially if you are willing to challenge yourself, if you are willing to take what you already know in Chinese martial arts or in any martial art, and you are willing to test it, if you are willing to challenge it, if you are willing to fail and come back stronger, then that is moving towards what true Kung Fu is. It's about putting in that hard work and be willing to grow naturally, rather than taking a shortcut of some easy mystical power that you just get through an elaborate power-up sequence or through a mystical scroll. That's not true Kung Fu. True Kung Fu is through bitter work, it's through hard work, it's through skill, it's through challenge. As the idea of Shaolin, it wasn't so much a system. It's not a linear system. It is a philosophy, a mindset, a continual growth of wiping away the old. As the idea of Shaolin, it wasn't so much a system. It's not a linear system. It is a philosophy, a mindset, a continual growth of wiping away the old, maintaining what works, but improving upon it at the same time.
There is no secret ingredient.
Okay, so in a practical sense, how do you move towards true Kung Fu? Well, as we've already said, hard work, discipline, patience, but more important than that, practicality. Ironically, MMA, modern MMA, is moving towards more of an idea of true Kung Fu than is actual Kung Fu. Because it's about learning and growing and changing and sharing knowledge. It just doesn't have that spiritual side, ironically enough. If it included the spiritual part of it, and I'm sure people do in isolated cases, individual people probably look to their faith for guidance in terms of their practice. But doing things such as sparring, such as pins, such as locks, learning those things, or doing something such as grappling, which is something that Chinese martial arts, to my knowledge, doesn't really do all that much. Learning those things, that's moving towards true Kung Fu. We'll take that knowledge of learning and improving and take it out into the world. So I say to you all, keep growing, keep working, and until next time, peace be with you. And so we have come to the end of our top 5 videos of 2023. As we now look forwards, not just to the end of this year, but the beginning of the next. What will await us then? We'll find out. But until then, thank you all for watching, and until next time, peace be with you.